This is the biggest change in the environment that I've seen probably in my career. The world economy has been shook up like a snow globe. We've gone from world trade and globalization to this system which implies significant restrictions on trade in every direction and a step toward isolation for the United States.
And the primary reason that widespread tariffs are isolating to the United States is because they push foreign trade away. Yes, they may generate more tax revenue for the government, but in doing so, they actively discourage Americans from buying foreign products. I know I've gone over this in recent videos, so I'll keep it brief, but the way tariffs work is that the United States imposes an additional tax on US companies that buy goods from overseas. So if GM imports cars or car parts from Mexico, they pay an import tax, a tariff, to the US government when they bring those goods into the US. But this cost is almost always passed on to the end consumer. GM don't want to take the hit, so they sell their cars for an increased cost. So this makes foreign-made goods more expensive. So naturally, less people buy them. And what the government hopes is that this reduced purchasing of foreign goods and increased purchasing of American-made goods will convince companies that manufacture abroad to bring their production into America.
The tariffs are designed to encourage production at home, but who could imagine that most things produced in the United States will be as cheap as they are coming from abroad? In other words, things will cost more.
That's the big problem, and it's the main argument from economists. These tariffs are going to push prices up no matter which way you spin it. Tariffs themselves force the price of cheaper foreign goods up, but on the flip side, if that does encourage companies to just manufacture in America instead, well, manufacturing products in America costs more than manufacturing in China or Vietnam or India. So you get this double whammy where no matter what, prices go up. And that obviously isn't great because Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve have just started to get inflation under control after that post-COVID run. And now the Trump administration is voluntarily inviting prices to rise.
Tariffs are an increased cost. Somebody has to pay them. Most people think the consumer will pay them, but it's an increased cost, the proceeds from which will go to the government. Will society be better off as a result?
And that's really the big question. And the unfortunate answer is probably no, because while globalization may not be great for American manufacturers, as it's expensive to manufacture products in America, making their products less competitive, globalization generally is extremely beneficial for American consumers. And we have it to thank for the low inflation we've seen throughout most of the last few decades. Really, since the 1990s, inflation stayed consistently low, barely breaking out of the 2 to 3% range. Through this period, Nike made shoes in Vietnam, Indonesia, and China, which keeps the cost down. Apple manufactured the majority of its products in China, and GM and Ford sourced a significant number of their parts from Mexico and China. This kept prices much lower for American consumers buying them. If those companies had to manufacture their products in America, the prices would have been a heck of a lot higher. Labor costs are higher in the US. Building factories is more expensive in the US. Sourcing components and materials would have been more expensive. In fact, in 2016, an MIT study found that the cost of an iPhone 6s Plus would have immediately risen over $100 per unit if it were made in the US, or $132 more expensive in today's dollars. So sure, the US may have bought more from other countries than what they bought from America during that time period, but the result was Americans prospered.
I believe that the last 80 years since World War II have been the best economic period in the history of mankind. And one of the major reasons was the growth of trade. We have truly had a rising tide that lifted all boats, and trade was a big part of that. There were financial benefits from globalization, including keeping a lid on inflation. If we hadn't bought our TV sets and appliances from abroad, what would inflation have been? And the answer is considerably more. Maybe not 2, but maybe 3, 4, 5.
So from my research, and by that I mean my extensive playtime on Civ 5, I can tell you that there are many benefits to embracing trade, and in many instances, trade is necessary. Why does America buy its coffee beans from places like Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, Honduras, Guatemala, Ethiopia? Well, it's because America's climate can't support large-scale coffee bean production. I like this comment I saw in a recent CNBC video. Colombia has coffee, USA wants coffee, Colombia sells the coffee, USA buys the coffee. In Donald Trump's eyes, Colombia is ripping off the USA. That's pretty much what Trump's tariff board was saying. Another example, why does America import rare earth elements from China? Well, it's because China just controls 80% of the world's refining. So to boycott these imports is to boycott smartphones, EVs, wind turbines, military technology, and semiconductors, something that I don't think the US wants to do.
The good news is that the Italians make the pasta and the Swiss make the watches. But if we stop world trade and the Swiss have to make their own pasta and the Italians have to make their own watches, people in both countries will be a little worse off. That's what we're talking about here. Worldwide welfare is maximized when every country does the things it does best and cheapest and then sells them to the countries that need them, which do other things and sell them to other people. That's how trade works.
And with Trump backtracking on his new tariff plan after just 8 days, I think he and his administration are starting to understand exactly Howard's point. But why is this having such a massive impact on the stock market? We've seen the stock market fall like a brick, and now, at least yesterday, rise 10%. Well, there are really two factors at play that affect the businesses that make up the S&P 500. The first and most obvious one, tariffs raise costs for US-based companies that import goods. Take Ford or GM. They might assemble their cars in America, but many of the parts come from abroad, especially from countries like Mexico. Now, if those parts get more expensive due to tariffs, their profit margins get squeezed. If tariffs get paused, that's good news for those companies and the share prices rise. That dynamic is true for countless other businesses as well. But then beyond that, the second factor, and this is the really important point, so shout out to Richard from the Plain Bagel for highlighting it, is that 41% of the S&P 500's revenue now comes from overseas. That includes companies like Amazon, Tesla, Nvidia, Exxon, McDonald's. Add up all their global sales, and on average, nearly half comes from international markets. Now that's a big problem if these tariffs spark a full-on trade war, which, let's be honest, it already sounds like it might, particularly with China. As we saw, China isn't backing down with an 84% retaliatory tariff announced on the US and export controls placed on Chinese rare earth elements, bringing the plot of Black Ops 2 one step closer to becoming a reality. And there's still the possibility that other countries could work together and impose retaliatory tariffs on US goods should the situation again escalate. If that happens, foreign consumers may be discouraged from buying American products, not because they don't want them, but because they're now more expensive due to those retaliatory tariffs. So now the US companies could potentially face a double whammy. Their costs go up and their sales go down. But the situation keeps flip-flopping, and that's why markets are reacting so violently.
You know, obviously, the state of the world, which equity prices depend on, is completely in flux and has been radically changed. Most investors think for the worse. That's why prices are down. The question, of course, is whether they're down too much, just right, or not enough.
And because such a high percentage of market activity is carried out by institutional investors who are notoriously short-term focused and thus sensitive to macroeconomic changes, it means that this macroeconomic uncertainty causes extreme volatility in share prices. That's exactly what we've seen. For example, one of the most powerful long-term moat companies out there is Apple, Warren Buffett's biggest investment. They have a nigh on impenetrable moat. But because they do a lot of manufacturing in China and sell a lot in China, investors panic sold off the stock like you wouldn't believe. The shares were down 33% from their highs at the end of last year. And now, on yesterday's news, have popped 15%, all due to short-sighted concerns thanks to current macroeconomic uncertainty. But do you reckon Warren Buffett is sitting there worried about the short-term macro environment? I don't think so, and neither is Howard Marks.
The world economy and the world order beyond economy, meaning geopolitics and international relationships, has been shook up like a snow globe by the events of the last days, and nobody knows what it's going to look like. I always inveigh against forecasting. I don't believe in macro forecasting, and we know much less today than usual.
So with that mentality in mind, that idea of not trying to guess the unpredictable nature of macroeconomic events, you're really left with two options. If you're a passive investor, you buy consistently during rain, hail, and shine, sticking your head in the sand and trusting the long term. Or if you're a Buffett-style investor who does buy individual companies, you have to focus on that bottom-up approach, sticking to companies you know and judging each business based on its long-term prospects, not based on macroeconomic possibilities, but based on expected business performance. Apple is the primary example. Investors think Apple is now 30% less valuable thanks to speculation around macroeconomic changes. Do you believe that's fair when you look at their long-term business performance? Definitely not. Now, am I saying buy Apple stock? No, but that's the mindset that the best of the best come at the markets with. blocking out the macro and focusing on bottom-up analysis.
You have to think in terms of your neighbor, the department store. Bloomingdale's just put everything on sale. Prices have come down for the S&P 8% in the last 2 days, and much more in the last 6 weeks. It's on sale. That should encourage people to think about buying. Will they go down further? Nobody knows. Are the prices fair? Nobody knows. But everybody runs from the market when prices go down because they think it connotes risk. It's just stuff going on sale.
As they say, the stock market is the only place where shoppers rush out of the store when the sale sign goes up. So I hope that gives you a bit of context around recent market events. Last thing to mention is that if you want to get serious about Warren Buffett style stock analysis, do check out Introduction to Stock Analysis over on New Money Education. It's a full 7-hour self-paced video course on Warren Buffett's 4 key pillars of value investing. It's got 3 different valuation methods in it that you can work through, plus a whole lot more. But with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like on it. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.